forum, so, along with the advisory team.
Thank you, Bishop. I'm Pastor Frank Weller from South Lansing Christian Church. We're down on Aurelius Road between Miller and Dell.
Good. Amen. Wonderful. Good to have you.
Pleasure to meet you.
With us. And we certainly hope that when we're done with this forum, that it'll be value added to you, not only you, but all the others that are on the call, on the Zoom.
Gabriella, I'm so glad you're here.
Thank you.
I'm waiting on my cue. I don't know why this thing join is up here for me. Does it want me to rejoin?
This is your reminder.
Oh, that's my reminder. Okay. I had my reminder on to remind me, and it just did. So, Jennifer, good to see you. Dr. Cabana.
Good to see you too. Thank you.
Cabana, yeah.
Cabana.
Cabana, I got it right. I'm going to mess up your name and a few others before this is over with. Good to have you.
Bless you, Bishop.
Bless you. Is that Milton?
Yeah, this is the young Milton.
Yeah, you know, I knew this was the young Milton. Yeah. Yeah.
Excuse me.
I've
Blessings to all the people. God bless all of you.
The Elder Milton. So I know that the mayor and Bishop Maxwell and some of them, I know he had the city council meeting evening and some other things, but he's going to work it in. Yeah. And Chief Green.
Bishop, the mayor and Chief Green are both on the call now, happily.
I'm here. Hi, Bishop.
Maybe coming on just a little late, and okay, I'm swiping over and I'm looking and seeing someone. So we're gonna get ready to get started. Is Bishop Maxwell there?
No.
Okay, well, he's got to start us off in prayer.
I can call him if you want.
Yeah, call him and check and see how long it's gonna take before he get on.
Yes, sir.
Welcome, everyone. I just swiped through and I see we got quite a few more on, and I anticipate more are going to be joining us here. We're going to try to get through this, and hopefully when we're done, something positive will come out of it. One of the things we really don't need, I'm reminded of a commercial. I don't know if you've seen that commercial that was on where they were talking about something working, and a young man was sitting in a seat with a psychiatrist, and he asked him a question, does it work? And they said, yeah, it works. He said, good, because I can't take one more thing to go wrong. In the environment that we're in with the COVID-19 virus, with the protests and all the other things that are going on, and deaths, sicknesses, and things, we really don't need one more thing to go wrong today. So we're hoping that this will be positive, and something positive will come out of this. Many times groups meet, we say we're going to do things, say we're going to try to accomplish certain things, but often leave without doing it, and it sits on the table.
All right, thank you.
And leave frustrated. Yeah. So what's going to happen is once we get started, we're going to mute everyone and until it's time for someone to speak or share, and then we're going to unmute them. And I'm gonna explain how we're going to operate in here during this forum. So if Bishop Maxwell is there,
yes, he is.
I'm going to ask him to, if he will, to open us up in prayer, and we just welcome everyone that's here Today, we welcome all of our participants, welcome all of our members of our Interfaith Advisory Council, Mayor Andy Shor, Police Chief Darrell Green, the Greater Lansing Clergy Forum members, and we have some clergy from the metropolitan area that's part of this forum as well. And we have some selected leaders from the community, young people that are here as well from the community. I wished I could have all of the participants share their name and who they are and who they represent, where they're from, but because we have such a robust schedule, I want to get going in it so that we don't tie up everyone's time today. I'm expecting State Rep Sarah Anthony to be on soon, as well as Ingham County Prosecutor Carol Seaman. And so we look forward to having a wonderful time. Bishop Maxwell, you can start, open us up in prayer.
Thank you to the esteemed convener, visionary of this forum, and to our mayor, and to all of my fellow pastors, ministers, community activists, and citizens of Lansing. Let us pray. Lord Jesus Christ, we come before you as humbly as we know how. We come before you at a point of inflection in our community and in our world, as our world has been beset globally by a pandemic, COVID-19. And intersecting with that COVID-19 pandemic was the awful and atrocious death of Ahmaud Arbery and the awful and atrocious death of Breonna Taylor and the awful and atrocious death of George Floyd. Oh God, these things have heightened our consciousness. It has intensified our scrutiny on things of equity involving people of color and the disparities that exist in so many platforms. But we're thankful that we as a community in Lansing have come together to be solution-oriented. We pray for the success of this forum, the success of our engagement and our interaction. We ask that you would continue to cover your people, those who are recovering from COVID-19, those who have been the victims of COVID-19. We ask that you would continue to allow your healing mercy and grace upon their lives. And we say a special prayer for the family of George Floyd as they now celebrate his life and memorialize him as he has taken center stage. We ask that this and those things that we have petitioned, that you would grant that for us. This we ask in the name of your darling son, Jesus Christ. Amen, amen.
Amen. Thank you, Bishop Maxwell. Bishop Maxwell is the director of the Mayor's Office of Community and Faith-Based Initiatives and the senior staff on the Interfaith Advisory Council. And thank him for that wonderful prayer. And I'm gonna share my screen right now and just talk about a few things. This forum is set up through the Interfaith Advisory Council and it's entitled Working Together for Systemic Changes in the Lansing Community. And originally the Interfaith Advisory Council, we were planning on trying to do panel discussions, and because of what's been going on in our community, I felt it was needful for us to kind of weigh in right away and not wait any longer. So I called the mayor, talked to Mayor Bishop Maxwell and the Interfaith team, and scheduled this forum for today. You go to the next screen.
Bishop, are you going to record this?
Yeah, we're recording this. We are recording this. We've done our welcome and some of our introductions, and I really wish we could have everyone introduce themselves. And we've had our opening prayer. I just want to say something just briefly here. The real issue, I believe, in our community, outside of the sin issue, you know, coming from the faith community, one of the things we focus on is the problem with our society that's related to sin. And when I say sin, I'm talking about the sin of selfishness, the sin of greed, the sin of pride, and all those things really damage things. But I think outside of that, the real issue is the unwillingness, amen, of different entities to gain a deeper understanding of each other. And in many cases, are not even focused on that, trying to fix problems without really taking the time to have constructive interaction and understanding each other so that we can really do problem solving. So we set up this forum to try to fill that void, because if we don't talk to each other, if we don't come up with things where we can really interact with each other, it's not going to do any of us any good. Just a little wisdom from above, found in Hosea 4:6. It says, "My people are destroyed for the lack of knowledge." And he said, "Because you have rejected knowledge, and also I also will reject you as my priest." And he's talking to the priest. "Because you have ignored my law, I will also ignore your children." So part of the things that we're facing, I believe, today are generational, because things that should have been solved generations ago are impacting us today. So if we don't do something to turn the tide and to address the situations in front of us, the next generation is going to have to suffer. And so I think sometimes you have to draw the line in the sand, and it's important for us to have as many settings as possible where people can truly express themselves without being judged. And I'm hoping this setting can be that setting, one of those settings, even when we share controversial, provocative thoughts. When we come together, despite our individual philosophies, our individual value judgments, our individual prerequisites, I believe it's this type of interaction and this type of environment that can really create change, because people need to be heard. Even when they're wrong, they need to be heard. But the question is, how is anyone going to be heard if nobody's listening? Martin Luther King said, "The language of the unheard is riots." And so we've seen a lot of unrest, so that may mean somebody's not being heard. I just want to say that nothing any of us can share, any of us are going to say, nothing's new. Systemic racism is not a new issue, especially for those of us who live with it. But it still remains that much work has to be done. And there are some things being done on many levels today because of the unrest. You can't even turn the television on without seeing protests all over this country. And there's many groups here and there that are actually doing things, coming up with ideas on the national level, the state level, local level, to address systemic issues that impact people of color. But here's the other problem. Not everyone and not all are on the same page. Some people I've heard argue and I've talked to that don't even feel like systemic racism is a factor. But I'm okay with everyone having their own view. But there's things that are happening. There's really no deficit of ideas. If we was to unmute everybody, everyone would probably have an idea or some type of thought concerning this. But where there really is a deficit, there's a deficit, I believe, of courage to act. Courage in the political arena, courage in institutions, corporations, and courage in neighborhoods. And that impacts all of us, just meeting our neighbors, talking to them, learning about them, understanding their culture, eating their food, sharing ideas and opinions with them. So I think what we have is a deficit of courage. And I have you know, I'm sharing, but I'm not speaking in a void. I'm sharing. I've had my own personal experience as an African American living in this country, not only in this country, but also in Lansing. Myself as a young man, I was profiled personally many times. I can remember late one night, 3 or 4 o'clock in the morning, I had a car that broke down on me, and I was on the side street with the hood up, and I didn't have my tags updated at that time. And a police officer, I flagged him down when I saw him to help me so he can get somebody to help come jump me. And that was the time before you had cell phones. And I just wanted help. And when I got through, he looked at my tags and he said, "Your tags have expired." And then he harassed me because of that. And many of us can tell stories of that. I had a son, young son, was accused of something, him and a cousin and another young man in middle school. And it was a room full of young African-American boys. And this happened to be a white young man, late girl that went to a counselor, and she accused them of raping her. And it went into the news and all of those good things. And before it was over with, the police came to my house, and I was part of a community and was known in the community. And they came to my house and put my son in handcuffs in front of all my little children. He was just 11 years old. And all they had to do was tell me to bring him in, and I would have brought him in, but I didn't have that chance. Those type of things stick in your memory, and it sticks in the memory of young African Americans. And subsequently, the whole thing was dropped because the girl was lying. They found out through medical things and all that. And she was upset with one of the boys in that room because they were going together and something went wrong. So it was dropped. But they went through all this, and to this day, my son has a slight paranoia, and he's 40 years old now. And you stack that up on some of the other things that have taken place. So much work needs to be done. We need courage to do it. We need courage in our prosecutor's office. We need courage in the corporations. We need courage in government to act. And so, and I think we can do that. And the current events in our country and city reminds us that we need immediate action. I want to, you can go to the next slide, but I want to just kind of share with you the main objective of this forum. The main objective of this forum is to bring the Lansing community together to move forward progressively for sustainable systemic change. That's the main objective, is to bring us together because we all want justice, but what we really need is systemic change. I think justice is always on the table, but change is the most important thing. And I think we need the type of change for this country, for this community, that will remain in effect no matter who's in office. I don't think we need window dressing change. We need more than what I refer to as window dressing change. And window dressing change is, sometimes people feel like if we put a person of color in a position of government or in a corporation or in an institution, that solves all the problems, but not really, because if the people in the institution do not work with them, nothing will change. And on the other hand, if the individual that's put in place get caught up in the culture themselves, nothing will change. So we need more than just window dressing. We need more than just putting people in positions and looking at skin color, because technically change comes when character is in place. Desired outcomes of this forum is 3. Feeling. We want you to feel something. We want you to know something, and we want to do something. This is desired outcomes. As a result of this forum, we want participants to leave feeling that their voices are being heard. We don't, we want to get beyond, we tried to tell them, we tried to talk, we tried to share, but nobody cares, nobody's doing anything. And not only feel, but we want you to know. We want you to know that there's buy-in on specific issues, our initiatives, and policies that will be enduring and sustainable beyond any one administration. So we want to leave here, focus on things that, in knowing that what we buy in, it can be put in place. The other thing that we want to leave here doing, we want to identify agreeable solutions that all the entities that are involved in this forum can work together on to ensure systemic change take place in our community. We're not focused on the overall country, but I think our sphere of influence is our immediate community. And we just want to focus on the things that we can have buy-in on and agree to work through them. A few expectations I want to share. One is respect. We're just asking everyone to respect every participant, whether you agree with them or not. And all participants work together to ensure this forum does not become a rage session. So some of the questions, and we're going to have you do that too. We don't want people to use this forum as a political platform and avoid grandstanding. We want to have real dialogue on real issues, and we want to listen to each other. So we're going to encourage you that if you have any questions, put them in the chat on this Zoom. Put them in the chat, and my administrator here is going to bring them to the forefront, and we're going to try to answer those questions if we can. So we want you to just kind of relax and think about these things that we're trying to do and help us get to the bottom of this. Amen. I want to, at this time, take a moment to introduce our first presenter, Dr. Jennifer Cabina, and who is an associate professor in the School of Criminal Justice at MSU, and the author of a book, Hands Up, Don't Shoot, which examines what led to the Ferguson and Baltimore protests. She was just interviewed on CBS, and a wonderful interview, and I just want to introduce her today, and we're going to bring her in at this time. Welcome, Jennifer.
Great. Thank you for having me. I'm grateful to be on here speaking. I'll give a brief presentation with regards to the book, and I'm grateful for everyone who's taken the time to be here. I am going to share my PowerPoint, and I'm just going to make sure it works, so we'll see. Is everyone able to see my PowerPoint?
I see it.
Okay, great. So I'll present briefly for about 20 minutes or so. So as has already been mentioned, I published a book called Hands Up, Don't Shoot: Why the Protests in Ferguson and Baltimore Matter and How They Changed America. So as many of you all know, on August 19th, 2014, Michael Brown, an unarmed 18-year-old African-American male, he was fatally shot by Darren Wilson, and a white police officer in Ferguson, Missouri, who was not charged for the shooting. Following the death of Michael Brown, the city of Ferguson went through civil unrest over what many in the community perceived was another unjustifiable homicide of an unarmed African-American male at the hands of the police. And so protests, along with riots and angry encounters with the police, occurred following the shooting. And the police handling of protests also received sharp criticism due to its militarized response and excessive use of force, similar really to what we're seeing now. Most of us are also aware that 8 months following the death of Michael Brown, on April 12th, 2015, officers from the Baltimore Police Department, they arrested Freddie Gray. He was a 25-year-old African-American male, and he was arrested for possessing an illegal switchblade. He unfortunately ended up dying of severe spine and neck injuries, which he suffered while in police custody. Peaceful protests initially arose in Baltimore. However, rioting, looting, and arson did break out on the day of Freddie Gray's funeral. Although the Baltimore Police Department, they initially restrained themselves from aggressively engaging with the crowd or with demonstrators. However, the police response did become more militarized as protests became violent. The deaths of both Michael Brown and Freddie Gray really gave rise to the Black Lives Matter movement. So this emerged in 2013 after the murder acquittal of George Zimmerman and the death of Trayvon Martin, who at the time was a 17-year-old African-American male. Because many African Americans, they were tired of the extrajudicial killings of Blacks by police and by self-declared vigilantes, the movement really unfolded as a call to action, demanding changes as to how police deal with minorities, and particularly Black individuals, but also calling for an end to systemic racism that exists in this nation. And so the deaths of both Michael Brown and Freddie Gray were two of several high-profile cases high-profile police killings that gave impetus to the Black Lives Matter movement. And protests at each of these sites brought out decades of pent-up emotions of anger, outrage, frustration, deep sorrow from much of the Black community. And the use of repressive or oppressive police tactics that were used against protesters at each of these locations really confirmed to many the continued racism and discrimination that many Blacks experience and still continue to experience at the hands of various state institutions, including the police. So in my book, Hands Up, Don't Shoot, I do a deeper delve into these issues. And in the book, I bring together research on race, place, and policing, along with scholarship on social movements, with the aim of investigating how and why Ferguson and Baltimore became highly publicized sites for protests. And I also examine how Ferguson and Baltimore residents understand their experiences with the police, and then looking at how these experiences shape their perceptions of the police. In addition, I sought to examine what galvanizes the Black Lives Matter as a social movement. And then finally, I sought to understand how police tactics during these demonstrations, given that the police tactics were militarized, how did that affect protesters' willingness to engage in subsequent protest movements? And so in the study, I draw on in-depth interviews with a total of 192 residents and protesters. 100 from Ferguson, 92 from Baltimore, Maryland, and both sets of interviews were conducted 2 to 3 months after the death of both Michael Brown and Freddie Gray. So it was certainly during the height of protests that were going on. So I want to turn attention to the accounts of residents in both Ferguson and Baltimore, in which I examined their experiences with, as well as perceptions of the police, and I documented their encounters with the police, favorable encounters with the police, as well as adverse encounters with the police. And participants, they drew from their own personal experiences, but also they drew from indirect experiences that they had with the police. So by indirect experiences, I mean that individuals may not have direct encounters with the police, but yet they're learning about encounters that family members, friends, or neighbors have had with the police. So there was a total of 218 police incident descriptions. And of those experiences with the police, 148 of these interactions, or 1/3 of these interactions, were said to be negative in nature. 68, or I should say 2/3 of the interactions were said to be negative in nature. 68, or 1/3 of these interactions, were said to be positive in nature, and 2 were neutral. So for the sake of this meeting, I will simply focus on the negative encounters people have with the police, since that is certainly what has drawn many people here and has caused a great deal of concern. So I will first focus on the common themes identified regarding negative police encounters with the police. There were 4 common themes. The first common theme identified had to do with aggressive policing. 1/3 of these negative interactions were described by residents as being overly aggressive and or physically violent. The vast majority of responses actually came from Black residents, and there were some who reported accusations or threats of physical abuse, even when they were not engaged in criminal activity. For example, I'm going to show you in a moment that Montel, he described to me an incident in which he said he was stopped for what he says was a bogus claim by the police that something was wrong with his tags. And he said that one thing led to another, and I'm getting body slammed on my face by the police. And at the time of the interview, he actually had a scar on his face that was a result of this incident. There were also some who described police acting aggressively, particularly towards males who resided in high crime neighborhoods. For example, Darnell, he detailed an incident where when he was a teenager, he was playing basketball with his friends at the park. An officer told him and his friends that they had to go because it was about to be after hours at the park. Darnell and his friends all agreed to leave, but after the officer left, they wanted to finish their game. And so Darnell explains what happened. He said, the officer comes back. He says, didn't I tell you, mother effers, get the F out. You guys need to leave. My friend throws the rock at his car. He comes back, calls another squad car. There's about 6 of us, and they just whooped on all of us. They hit me in my face once, my ribs twice, saying y'all need to get on. So there were certainly a few Black residents in the study who were physically abused, and they admitted to engaging in either delinquent or criminal behavior. As we can see in Darnell's account, he mentions that his friend threw a rock at the officer's car. Yet at the same time, they also expressed that despite participation in unlawful behavior, they expected the officers to still operate within the boundaries of the law. And certainly those who were engaged in illegal activity ended up often being the recipient of more severe forms of police misconduct. I should also mention that some residents also reported that Black officers were just as aggressive. 25% of residents made such claims within my study, and they often came from Black residents Black individuals in the study who resided in Baltimore, and they often were more likely to have direct encounters with Black police officers. For example, Davina states that Black police, they curse the Black guy out and whatever, they sling him around, because I've seen them sling my son around. Sling him around, throw him up against the wall, just like Freddie Gray. And so here we see that Davina's view of Black officers was tied to her having observed the differential treatment that they displayed towards men, and particularly Black men, including the harsh treatment that her son received. And so as a result, Davina and many others viewed police officers, Black and white, in an unfavorable light. Among the negative interactions that were reported in the study, 1/3 of these interactions were said to be racial profiling in nature. Study participants, they often emphasize the arbitrary nature of officers' decisions to stop and question young Black males. For example, Nikesha states that my brother and my boyfriend, because they're African-American males, the police already assume that they're up to no good, just because of their appearance, the type of car they have, and just the day-to-day basic stereotypes that African-American males today face. So many of the respondents in the study, they were well aware of the heightened suspicion that police officers had towards young Black men, and that this often had to do with extra legal issues. So for instance, legal reasons for being stopped, we know have to do with such issues as having a faulty taillight or headlight, erratic driving, speeding. However, extra legal reasons, also what is known as investigatory policing, this tends to be shaped by factors such as race, ethnicity, gender, personal characteristics such as clothing, hairstyle, and tattoos. And young Black civilians often believe that they were frequently targeted by the police for these reasons. For example, Tyrone stated that if you've got tattoos and you're young, you're a target. I could just be walking down the street, minding my business. I can have my shirt off. The police just pull up on me. What are you doing? Where are you going? They start asking me questions like they're my parents. So because the majority of residents who were targeted, they couldn't understand why the police would view them with suspicion, particularly when they were engaged in lawful behavior. And so as a result, there were a few who did defy police officers' commands. And Tyrone's account is illustrative, and I'll show you that in a moment, where he explains an incident in which an officer stops him while he was walking to the bus stop going to work. And he says, this is what happened. The officer was asking me, like, where are you going? I'm like, why are you asking me where I'm going? It's early in the morning. Obviously, I'm going to work or I'm going to school. Like, leave me alone. Then the officer was like, get down on the ground. I'm like, for what? I'm not getting down on the ground. I'm waiting on the bus. Leave me alone. So he got out of the car and he put me in handcuffs. And consequently, Tyrone was arrested and locked up for failure to cooperate with an officer. So in this account, we see that Tyrone, he clearly takes offense to having been randomly questioned by the officers, and he challenged the fairness of this officer's suspicion towards him. The lack of deference that Tyrone displayed towards the police is tied to the fact that he resented being stopped without any legal justification. And Tyrone's direct challenge may seem questionable to some, especially since the officer asked what appears to be an innocuous question: where are you going? But Tyrone, like many Black men in the study, they were routinely viewed with suspicion for being out of place when they traveled to largely white spaces or middle-class spaces. In addition, Tyrone, along with countless other Black men from Ferguson and Baltimore, they were often predisposed to mistreatment from local police officers simply because of where they lived. And so ultimately, entire neighborhoods were criminalized, regardless of whether individual residents were actually engaged in criminal behavior. Moreover, I should say that the question of where are you going has an onerous history. So prior to the Civil War, slave patrollers, they constantly questioned the whereabouts and the activities of slaves. And so in an attempt to control their movements, authorities enacted criminal statutes that prevented slaves from leaving their master's property without a proper pass. And so there were some Black residents in both Ferguson and Baltimore who viewed officers' aggressive policing tactics really as an explicit attempt to restrict their movements. And so these accounts also illustrate, how the legacy of race and place continues to play out in contemporary relationships between police and civilians, particularly Black individuals. And so while residents, they objected to being profiled by the police, participants often also disliked the way that officers spoke to them. 1/5 of the police encounters were reported as being disrespectful in nature. There were some Black residents who reported that officers hurled racial slurs at them and made derogatory remarks. For example, when Jerry explains an incident where he was stopped by the police and he said that the officer stated, "We got us a big one, got me a big one. Look at him, look at his feet." He was talking to his partner saying, "Boy, you're a big boy." And so because of the officer's apparent racial attitude, Jerry had told me that he, quote unquote, I felt like I was in the 1950s or 60s or something. But I should say that such treatment, it was not just relegated to Black men, but also inclusive of Black women as well. So in 8% of these incidences, Black residents, they reported that women were also targets of racial profiling or mistreatment. There were a few who believed that the poor treatment they received was tied to the neighborhood that they lived in. For example, Jamia explained an incident in which she was giving rent money to her landlord, and she says that I handed him, being the landlord, I handed him the money out of my hand, and the police jumped up and said, get on the ground, thinking it was a drug transaction. And there were a few other women who talked about having been harassed by the police. And so Black women, in some cases, reported having comparable experiences as Black men as it relates to being targeted and harassed. And so ultimately, it was these negative experiences that people had with the police that drove them to the streets to protest police violence and broader structural inequalities, particularly after the death of both Michael Brown and Freddie Gray. People went out to protest because, one, they believed that Michael Brown and Freddie Gray were victims of injustice. Number two, they also believed that these were not isolated incidences. And that's because they either had been recipients of police harassment, surveillance, excessive use of force, or they knew someone who had been a recipient of that. Three, they went out, people went out to protest because many believed that they had a moral and ethical obligation to do so, because failure to do so would result in the list of Black individuals dying at the hands of law enforcement, that list would continue to pile up. And then finally, the reality is people wanted to see change. They wanted to affect change. So I want to shift gears a little bit towards looking at the behavior of law enforcement during protests. So this is known as protest police. That's when the police, they are policing the demonstrations that are going on. So in the 1960s and 70s, protest policing was based upon the philosophy of escalated force, in which increasing violence or force on the part of protesters was met with increasing force and violence from the police. And so this approach was primarily aggressive and confrontational in nature. The brutality of the 1960s policing led to an alternative approach, that being called the negotiated management. This was common largely in the 1970s and through the 1990s. So this approach is focused on the underlying philosophy towards protection of free speech, tolerance for some disruption, de-escalation, and the avoidance of police force unless absolutely necessary. So here, the protesters and police, they negotiate the use of protest permits that define the nature and the particulars of the protest in order to decrease disruptiveness from protesters and limit the need for police violence. However, as negotiations became less likely, protest policing shifted to what is called strategic incapacitation. This is where militarized policing was used to diffuse potential threats to public order. The strategic incapacitation approach incorporates numerous policing tactics that are aimed at neutralizing quote-unquote unruly protesters through the control of physical space. It's done through the deployment of new weapons, the use of less lethal weapons like tear gas and rubber bullets, the establishment of no protest zones. It's done through the strategic use of arrests as well as an intensified use of surveillance. So as we know, one response to handling grievances such as police violence and excessive use of force is to protest. And so at times, protests, they can go well. For instance, the response to Baltimore protesters was very distinct from the protesters who I interviewed in Ferguson. During the onset of protests in Baltimore, the police department, they initially responded with force restraint. And so that is, they restrained themselves from initially engaging aggressively with demonstrators. There was no deployment of lethal force. There was minimal to no deployment of less lethal force when protests initially began. And so because of this quote unquote soft approach that the police initially took, 1/5 of Baltimore protesters, they did have more favorable impressions of protest police than protesters in Ferguson. Even though, interestingly, in Baltimore, the way that they police demonstrators, it eventually did become militarized over time. However, Ferguson protesters, they complained that law enforcement relied heavily on aggression and violence during protests. That included tear gas, rubber bullets, gun threats, and physical violence, again, similar to what we are currently seeing taking place right now with law enforcement. So I was also interested in understanding how repressive police actions affected protesters' willingness to engage in future activism efforts. And what I found is that the answer to this question varied based upon the type of protester. So I identified 3 distinct characteristics that protesters manifested depending on their current commitment to the goal of protests. One type of protester was the revolutionary protester. These are protesters who essentially protested every single day or every other day. They may have stopped going to work, stopped going to school, or took a semester off. Many of them slept outside in tents. And essentially, they believed that their whole purpose in life was to facilitate change through protesting. And so overall, they expressed a very deep level of commitment to their protest movement. Another type of protester was what I called intermittent. The intermittent protesters were those who engaged in some form of street protesting at least 4 or more times. They went to work and they went to school, but yet at the same time, they engaged in protest because they were also committed to the cause. So in general, they held a middle ground commitment to collective action efforts. And then finally, the last type of protester was what I called the tourists. And so the tourist protesters were classified as people who took part in protests less than 3 times and really expressed much more curiosity than anything. They were well aware that history was in the making, news media outlets were out there, and so they came to check out what was going on, but overall their level of commitment was characterized as being in and out. So what I found is that revolutionary protesters, these were the individuals who protested on a regular basis. Many of them slept outside. They were insistent in remaining active in subsequent protest movements, even though they had experienced or been the recipient of repressive police tactics. For example, Maria states that after police were throwing tear gas canisters and pointing me out in a protest, it solidified that I would continue to be active as long as it takes. There were also some Ferguson protesters who were adamant to see change, even if it cost them their lives. For example, I interviewed one of Michael Brown's relatives, and Carlos, stated, "I will not stop protesting because it's my family. And if you want me to stop protesting, you have to put a bullet in my head to do that because I will be out here every day strong." Despite having been assaulted, targeted, and even arrested by the police, we see that Carlos remained resolute in engaging in street protests. And so overall, the threat and actual oppressive, heavy-handed tactics that were used by law enforcement, particularly in Ferguson, all this did is really create an internal solidarity among revolutionary protesters to continue participating in the protest movement. However, I will say in contrast, repressive police tactics did appear to deter some tourists as well as some intermittent protesters from engaging in street protests. However, they were motivated to engage in other forms of actions within the community. For example, Helen states that I plan to teach about the political process and the political system. And so there were some intermittent and tourist protesters who were deterred from engaging in street protests because of the actions of the protest police. That is, that they were resorting to violence. And so, however, at the same time, many of them did adapt different ways to engage the overall ideological goal of the Black Lives Matter movement through community action. So overall, what I found is that the cumulative impact of negative police encounters in both Ferguson and Baltimore really set the stage for reactions to the killings of both Michael Brown and Freddie Gray. So what do we need to do so that police officers stop killing Black people? Well, based upon what I found in my research is that ending the slaughter of Black and Brown individuals is not going to happen by doubling down on investments in the police. America's long history of state-sanctioned violence against Black Americans really reflects persistent inequities within the criminal legal system. Thus, rather than investing more dollars into police and more dollars into prisons, investments need to be made into marginalized individuals and communities. And so as a nation, the government has been tough on crime for decades by investing heavily in policing and in prisons as a means to solve everyday structural problems that disproportionately affect Black people. But yet, what if instead of being tough on crime, we were tough on the underlying issues that criminalize people? Imagine if we had resources that were distributed away from the criminal legal system and into communities. And imagine if we had funds that were spent on prevention and intervention initiatives for at-risk youth and young adults who have much promise. Imagine if these dollars were spent on addressing mental health, substance abuse, and homelessness, because currently the way we treat these individuals is they are typically ostracized, marginalized, and demonized, and then ultimately criminalized. And imagine if resources were spent on bringing more jobs into the community when living wages were paid, and quality education was provided. And so what I conclude in my book, Hands Up, Don't Shoot, is that ending the killing of Black people really requires doubling down on investments in communities, not the police, not the criminal legal system. Redistributing resources from the criminal legal system into cultivating institutions within poor communities is vital. And when we break these structural systems of oppression and seek an alternative vision for safety away from the hands of law enforcement and into the power of communities, I believe then we will begin to put an end to denying so many marginalized people their humanity. But I do want to say, I understand that that would require massive efforts to address educational and economic inequities. Not that it can't be done, but I also know that that tends to be in the long term. And so in the interim, some experts have stressed the need to address America's history of racial injustice within the criminal justice system to rebuild trust. So some are taking efforts to foster reconciliation with minority communities who have lost so much trust within the police. So this trust building process involves having very frank conversations between law enforcement and the people that they serve in order to, where they're addressing tensions, grievances, as well as the harm that traditional policing has caused, both in the past and in the present. And so sincere efforts by law enforcement to act differently and do better can reveal common ground within communities and facilitate new ways in which both sides can work together to decrease violence. And I think more of this is needed to improve relationships and build trust between civilians and law enforcement. Thank you for taking the time to listen.
I apologize. I had to unmute, and I was sitting here wondering why no one heard me. Thank you, Dr. Kabina. Did a wonderful job, very informative. Certainly, I would like to hear more about that, your work, and I have an autographed copy. I plan to read it. And basically, what she's sharing there is not all that new. We know those same statistics, same thing that happen all the time, but it was good to have her on with us. I just want to move ahead and look at some generational perspectives. And I want to start off with some generational perspective, and I would like to, it kind of like a diagonal slice, and give them maybe 5 minutes, each one of these individuals, to just kind of share their perspective on what's happening in our world in terms of the protests, the police interaction, all of those type of things, and maybe share something about what's happening outside of that. So I'm going to ask them to take about 5 minutes or less, whichever is needed, and share. I have someone from Generation Z, and I hope I get the name right. Gabriella Palacio. I believe I got it right. Are you there? Is Gabriella out there?
Yes, I am.
Oh, welcome. Good
Thank
to have you.
Thank you.
I want you to just take a little bit, and she's from Generation Z. Anyone that's born year 2000 to up to current. Go ahead, Gabrielle.
Okay, so I wrote something that I'd love to share with you guys. Okay. Hi, my name is Gabriella Dixon. I'm 16 years old. Today I want to talk to you about something that has been in my heart. It's equality. Why do we measure our success? Why do we put others down if they have more or less? Why in our heads we think, why does this keep happening? We can keep doing violence to our communities, or we can keep peacefully protesting, or even keep posting on social media. I am here to use my voice as a young biracial woman to share with you what I want to change. Beauty is not in one tone of skin. We all bleed the same color. I want to say I am very sorry and hurt for the people who have died or have been harmed because of these actions. This needs to stop. In my generation today, I want to be the person who stands up and lets others know that I want things to change in this society. In today's society, if an African American man or any minority goes anywhere, to a store or a gas station or anywhere else, they are risking their lives just by the way they look. People shouldn't define or judge you by the way you look. This needs to end. Innocent lives are taken just because they look like a harmful person. In society, everyone is here for a purpose, not to be judged by the color of their skin or by the way they look or talk. Why can't we just surpass everything that is judgmental and encourage people. If we could change one thing in this society, it should be the way we view people of color. I can't stress this enough. Everyone has their own worth in this world and needs to stop looking and judging people by how much they look like they have. But why judge them? You don't know their background or where they have been in life. Stop making assumptions of what you think happened by the color of their skin. It makes me so mad when innocent people look like they are harmful just by the color of their skin. God put us in this world not to be viewed by our color, but to be seen as one body and to be unified as one, and not to be seen in our own groups. We need to learn to accept all colors, all ages, all cultures, and all religions, and all types to live in a better society. I am not saying that this is going to change overnight, but if we accept who we are, then why can't we accept anyone else, everyone else around us? But this won't happen if people aren't willing to change the wrong ways into the right ways and start to stand up for people who are getting called racist words or anything. You need to stand up for others, yourself and others. And I can't do this alone. So who's on this journey with me? I want in our society everyone to feel loved. And it doesn't matter where you come from or where you're going in life or the color of your skin. I want people to feel safe and secure at all times. So when minorities go out, they feel the same as everyone else, and there is no judgment in the air. So for now, I want to see others as everyone being equal. There is no justification from privilege to non-privilege or anything else. We just feel equivalent to everyone else in our society from now on. Right now, if you have not been listening to this message, I want to tell you, I'm not going to stop fighting for equality until the last breath I take on this earth, and I mean it. Thank you.
Okay, I just unmuted again. I was talking and you didn't hear me. Thank you, did a wonderful job.
Thank you.
Were you involved in anything the day after the protest that Sunday evening?
Yes, me and my family went down to the Capitol and we were cleaning all the glass. We were cleaning all the graffiti on the walls. And that just made me think of like, what can I do to change? Like in this society, like I want to change the people that are in my generation because I don't want this just to keep happening. Like I just want to tell the world that right now, if I could change something, because me being so young, I want it to change now and to stop now.
Okay, so you were involved in the cleanup.
Yes.
Okay, did you have conversation with people while you were cleaning up? What was the attitude?
No, I did not.
Okay, all right, thank you for sharing.
Thank you for having me.
I want to hear from the millennial 1980 to 2000, just to get a perspective on that. And we have, what's her name?
Cameo King.
Cameo King. Is Cameo King out there?
I am here.
Okay, are you on the phone or where are you?
I'm here. I'm visual now. I had to get to a place with better lighting.
Okay, I'm trying to find you.
Maybe
I'm
like
looking.
on the last page.
Oh, I see you now.
Okay.
All right. Go ahead and take about 5 minutes, Sharon.
Sure. Thanks so much for having me a part of this call. Again, my name is Cameo King. I am a millennial. I've been a part of the Lansing community for a while now. And my involvement has been with teen girls primarily through my nonprofit, Grit, Glam, and Guts, as well as my media company, Good Girl Radio, where I have conversations with women from all walks of life. And we have very raw, real, and unabashed conversations. And I've also had done some work with social justice work, equity, really through the training and the arm of One Love Global. And so when we ask or when you ask maybe what some millennials are thinking and what's happening in millennial conversations, I can share some of my experiences. I think a lot of men and women, I think a lot of the sentiments have been shared, and possibly in other forms, that a lot of us are aware of very much the systemic issues that we face, and sometimes we feel powerless. We feel that there is very little that we can do. And I think we're at a place, especially with everything that has happened, we're at a place where we feel as though that there is power to really put our hands to the plow and do something about that. Now, what that something looks like, it definitely varies. And I think there is also very much a understanding of everyone has their own space, I'll say, or own part in the garden. So, whatever I'm doing, if I'm working with girls, how does that connect to the larger picture of ending or addressing systemic racism? If I am working in schools, if I am working in a nursery, how does that connect to the larger picture of systemic racism? And I also believe that one of the issues is accountability and responsibility, and really having, in a sense, if we are talking more so about the system or the law enforcement system, there are so many different levels to it. But when something goes wrong, it's typically, police checking police, and that is problematic. And a lot of us are aware of that. But the question is, what does that really look like? Like, what does the change sincerely look like? And are you really going to listen to us when we make these suggestions? Or is it just going to be, okay, we'll check, or okay, let me check the budget? I think that many of us are also in a position of power. We have done it the quote unquote right way, to ensure that we are in a position of power and effectuate change in our community, but we understand we can only do so much. And some of us, I think, simply we have our hands tied. And I also think, speaking as a woman, a Black woman, I think that the issues, especially since this is an interfaith conversation, the issues that women face, especially in the faith community, haven't risen to the level of attention that they should. And I'm so glad that the young lady, Dominica, I believe that was her name, that she had an opportunity to speak to represent young people, and that she is a part of this conversation, especially being a young woman. That is so exciting. And so ensuring that when we have these conversations, one, they just don't stay here. Two, and they aren't just a conversation. Like, what are some actual steps that we can move forward, and how are we not just, I don't want to say creating a space, because it's different. I was having a conversation with a friend of mine, both of us in church, and we were noticing one of the gaps is what happens is when you want to get youth involved, what you typically do is you keep the same structure and you just plop youth into that space. But what we saw is that doesn't work. It's like, allow youth to create their own space. And if we apply that same logic to how we're trying to overturn the system, we have to allow our people to create that space. What does that space look like? Because you still have the same system. You're just plopping people into the same existing system. And so I think that's something that we know. I think that's something that we're trying to change. But I think it takes work from everyone to acknowledge that, and also acknowledge their role, and how can I change this, and possibly how am I also a part of the problem?
Okay, great. Thank you for sharing that.
Thank you.
Good to hear from you. We just want to hear from all of the generations so that we can think about it as a whole. We have another individual from Generation X, 1965 to 1979, Dara Mayho. And are you there, Dara? Is she there? Yeah, I'm trying to find her. I saw her before. Dara?
Okay.
Are you there?
Can you all hear me?
Yeah,
Yes,
I hear you
I
now.
am. Can you all hear me?
We can hear you.
Okay.
Okay,
Good. Hello, everyone.
Hello.
I'm just here.
You're on.
Briefly, okay, great. I just wanted to share my perspective and my experience of being the person that we're really, really fighting for right now. I'm still the person we're really, really fighting for right now. But so many years ago, 20 and 25 years ago, I was right in, and I'm sharing these are going to be some gripping testimonies that I'm just sharing to get the attention of us who can really make a difference, who can really make a change, so that it's not another one of me 20 and 25 years later who's still saying, when is it going to change? So now that I'm on the other side and I'm a little bit stronger, I can fight for those who haven't come to the point of strength where I'm at right now. Generations of just treated so poorly and unfairly, being removed from my mother as a kid without her getting the resources that she needed to keep me at home. She didn't get to going back to home when things weren't. She didn't get any mentoring, any training, any programs. And what that did was trickle down to me, because I had adopted those same processes because it almost felt okay. I was okay with no one fighting for me because it just almost seemed normal. And I became that same mother. Okay, that same mother that had a few problems, yes, might have missed a couple doctor's appointments, because that's really what it stemmed down to. The system is so broken on so many levels. My own son was, I can't say separated, I can say ripped away from me, torn away from me, because I missed a few doctor's appointments, right? And so in that process, because I fell into depression, picked up some criminal activity, which didn't make it any better. Again, I feel like I'm fighting alone. Now I'm in a position of fighting for my son and fighting to be a good, a product in this society that's giving something positively, but really I don't know which way to turn. So here I am, locked up, fighting for my son to come back, and they tell me, we're going to give you 12 months to get your son back. We're not going to give you any programs that's going to help transform you or make you better. We're only going to give you enough time, which is almost the equivalent to your sentence. I was sentenced to 12 months in the county jail, but then they only gave me 12 months to get my son back. And I said to myself, as I'm sitting in that position and I'm seeing, and this is this is not being jovial at all, but when I see Megan and Becky going downstairs to visit their children because they had programs, but my son was snatched away. So much so, I begged and begged and begged. Can anybody help? Anybody, even on a community level? That led into 15 years of not even knowing if my son was dead or alive, knowing if he was okay, getting caught in the system, totally lost. I had nobody to help me, okay? So then I became angry. I became more of a nuisance in the community, so much so that I became a habitual offender, right? I was begging for somebody to help me, but now I'm angry, I'm depressed, I'm suicidal, I'm going back and forth to the mental health institution. I didn't have anybody to wing me up. I wished I had a Cameo King back there, because I believe that something like back then, I believe that would have been something that really would have helped me and brought me to a point of feeling my self-worth, knowing that I didn't have to live like that. Many times back and forth, he wasn't the captain chief then, but police officer Green had to come to my house, and many a times for domestic assault, because I was unlearned, I was untrained. All I knew was violence, okay? Stemming on more and more and more. I'm just wondering, how come I wasn't worth the time that some of my counterparts had, my white counterparts had? Every single child I had thereafter, even after I proved to be a fit parent, guess what? Every single time I had a child after that, even after proving myself in some of the classes, they weren't classes to train me to be a better parent. They were just classes to say that they actually tried to put me in something, but they really weren't going to help me. And then I finished. Well, even after marriage, even after proving myself to be fit, not just as a parent, but right in this community, they still came taunting me, child after child after child. I'm a business owner today. I'm a lot wiser today. I don't engage in those type of activity. My mind and my heart is in a place of helping my community. I'm not blaming anyone, but I thank God for those experiences that I can share with you all, because when people see me, all they see is the girl that they see in the community or helping out at church, or my friendly neighbor, Tim Van Lowe over there, who helped me to tutor my children and his wife and lovely family. Even those foster care experiences that I had, I'm seeing it come full circle. When I look down and I see Bishop Milton, who was my foster grandfather, Elder Milton, who was my foster uncle. So all of this stuff is coming to full fruition. And I'm saying there was purpose in that pain, but we really have to come to a point where we really empathize with people like me who have taken the time. I'm not just saying that that happened because I was this poor little Black girl that didn't have help. I've done my research. I have here an executive summary, the final report from Michigan Child and Family Services Review. This information was collected back in 2002, just 3 years of me getting my rights terminated to my son. It breaks my heart to read in these areas where I've highlighted to see that they didn't come up to par with the things that they promised to fix, so that we can help rehabilitate parents to say, well, you know what, there's some underlying issues like Cameo King talked about, housing issues, fixing juvenile delinquency, adding some preventative programs, giving people mentors. So I'm here, I'm pouring my heart out to you. I'm glad I'm not emotional tonight because I've had enough time crying. It's time to wipe our tears and be sensitive to what's really going on in our community. This stuff is real, folks. And I'm telling you right now, my talk matches my walk, and however I could play my part according to how the Lord should lead me and endow me, I'm willing to do, and I'm here to be of some service, because at some point someone did pick me up. People like my pastor and people in the community and his wife and people around me who actually do love me and gave me a helping hand, and I just want to be a person to be able to give that back to my community.
Okay, thank you. Wonderful. I wonder how many people out there protesting that been through experiences like yourself, and the frustration is just building up inside, and the anger. And, you know, oftentimes we look at protesters and say, why are they doing that?
Mm-hmm.
But you have to look at the big picture. Thank you for sharing. I got one more millennial Generation X that I want to bring on, Stephen Robertson. And I just want you to take, I'm watching the time because I got to keep moving. I don't want to take up too much of you all's time, but I do want him to just share just a little bit. Stephen?
Yep. Hey, good afternoon or good evening, everybody. I just wanted to just kind of talk from the perspective of a young African-American born in the 1980s, born and raised in Lansing, Michigan, and an entrepreneur in the city. But, you know, just hearing Pastor Singleton talk about the ordeal with his son, who's actually a cousin of mine, it literally brought me to tears, because I have two sons, and I can't even imagine, you know, the distress that put their family through, because it put our whole family through distress. Now this was a young man that was innocent and proven innocent, but at 11 years old, like an animal, handcuffed, shackled, in front of his siblings, in front of his parents, and you know, I don't believe that if you're not a young African American male or female, you have no idea of the type of trauma that we have gone through. I'm 37 years old, and in my short time on this earth, I've seen a great deal of trauma when it concerns to being profiled by the police, looked down upon by classmates in school. I went to Riddle Elementary School when it was still a regular elementary school in Lansing, and went to Otto, and then Sexton, and I ended up graduating from Okemos. And at each level, I experienced racism and bigotry and biases that coupled me in a group that was deemed as threatening and or irresponsible or wild or a ruckus to society. And I grew up in a Christian family home with 2 parents, and I have 6 or 5 older siblings and a younger sibling. But I remember one time I was walking through Old Town Lansing during the Jazz Fest. And this is one of many instances where I was racially profiled by a police officer. And to the first presenter's point, it's not just white police officers, it's Black officers too a lot of times, because for some reason, there is a perspective about young Black youth, young Black men, that we are automatically presumed unlawful, automatically presumed as criminals, automatically presumed as a suspect. While I was walking on Washington Avenue going to the Jazz Fest, this was probably about 8 years ago, and a police officer, I'm not a fair-skinned brother, but a police officer stopped me in the middle of the street as I'm walking across the street and told me to show him my ID. I'm not doing anything wrong. It's, thousands of people out there walking, but he, for some reason, said that I look like a wanted felon that they're looking for. I don't have a record or in trouble with the law or anything of that nature. But just because I'm a young Black male, it seems like there's a perspective about us that we're always up to no good. And I believe that from my experiences, officers have that in their minds from the onset. Doesn't matter if you got a doctorate degree or a high school education, you're all lumped into that same boat. One other instance that I'm gonna tell about before I go is I used to drive Uber in East Lansing, and I had a young white student in the car, in the back of my car. He was a freshman, and I got pulled over in East Lansing for apparently no reason, but the officer told me, she was a female Caucasian officer, she told me that I ran a red light, and clearly I'm paying attention and very vigilant while I'm driving people in the car. And I explained to her, I don't believe I ran a red light, I was paying attention. And immediately she got hostile with me. And actually this officer pulled me over twice and said, I'm not gonna argue with you, raised her voice and things of that nature, and kind of got a little belligerent with me. But she ended up giving me a ticket, and at the end of that interaction with the officer, the Caucasian young male that was in the car that I was giving him an Uber ride, he spoke up from the back and said, dude, you were being racially profiled. I didn't even have to say it. So this is not something that's a secret. It's definitely not a secret in the Black community, but to all of our Caucasian people on the line, your children are noticing this. And that's why you're seeing a lot of them out there protesting alongside with our people, because it's an atrocity. And I think it starts at a very young age when we first enter into the educational system. The only history that we were taught about our people was that we started off as slaves. And I believe that puts a ceiling out there, and that's a whole nother conversation. But I just wanted to share a little bit about some of my experiences when it comes to being racially profiled.
Thanks, Stephen. I appreciate that. Wonderful, wonderful perspective. Thank you for that. I want to move to the baby boomer, if you put the baby boomer scheme. And I have Suffolk Bishop Ronald Embry, who is a pastor of Agape Ministries. And he's going to just share, represent the baby boomers. I'm going to ask you to kind of stick to the 5 minutes or less, if you will.
Absolutely. Can you hear me?
I can hear you.
Okay, good. Okay, what I wanted to share with I've already been introduced, so we won't waste that time. But what I want to share with you is the fact that I am a lifelong resident of Lansing, born and raised here. Just so you understand, I was born, the listeners, I was born in 1958. And I've seen lots of transition in this city. I remember when I was growing up, and Pastor Singleton also remembers, we had a whole bunch of Black-owned businesses. We used to have you all would know this, but we used to have a Black grocery store entitled Your Market. And it was owned by the Nation of Islam. We had Johnny's Record Shop, we had Russell's Cleaners, we had Matthew's Diners, we had Fred and Bill's, we had Cromer's, Soul on a Roll, and all of these businesses were based in West Lansing. Now, what happened when 496 came through, it actually divided and separated the Black community. And then also with urban renewal, lots of houses were destroyed in the Black community, supposedly to advance the community. Now, what happened was, I remember as a young fella, we lived on Hillsdale, right near Sycamore, and I used to go over to the fire station and really had a pretty good relationship with the firefighters. But let me tell you something about some of the changes that have taken place back in, to give you a real view of the systemic racism. Back in 1986, after working for 10 years at the Motor Oil Corporation, I hired in with the state of Michigan. And when I hired in with the state of Michigan, there was my immediate supervisor. He makes a comment, he says, I have a bus and I'm gonna convert it over to a mobile home. And I'm not gonna let any ends ride in it. And I'm sitting up there, I'm like, really? I'm listening to this. I am appalled because this is a state of Michigan facility. So I go and see my union representative and I said, how is this acceptable? And I asked other employees, I said, is this the normal routine around here? You guys allow people to use racial slurs against other people? I submit to you, ladies and gentlemen, after I finish complaining about what happened, the union representative came, the shift commander, the warden, and as God is my witness, the man died that night. He literally died. Now, the point that I'm making is that we that have a voice, we can no longer remain silent when we see people doing wrong. There's a pastoral friend of mine in the city of Lansing. They were attempting to purchase a church in East Lansing, but they wouldn't sell it to her because they had a covenant, a clause in there that they would not sell to Black people. This is just a couple of years ago. And so what I'm saying to you is that the racism is systemic. It's ingrained into a society, whether it's redlining in your housing. I remember when we first started looking for a house in '79, I told my realtor what type of house I wanted, what type of neighborhood I wanted, and he kept trying to guide me somewhere, steer me somewhere else, because he didn't want us in certain neighborhoods. And so the system it is a system, believe it or not, it is a system where people, whether it's in education, I recall being in high school, my counselor didn't talk to me, and I didn't even know who my counselor was. Now, some of my other peers, they were told about colleges and universities and things of this nature. And so we have to be very careful that when we identify issues, we must make it known to others. But I want to share a couple of things right quick, and I'm going to get off here. Things that we must keep in mind, that the badge does not give anyone a license to kill. Training has to take place, because I found out over the years for working with the Department of Corrections, lots of the officers were bullies because they felt as though The badge gave them an S on their chest so it could dominate others. But there has to be training so that officers are taught to de-escalate things rather to elevate them. If I'm yelling at you and you yelling at me, we're never going to compromise. One of us has to have enough sense to lower their voice and to be calm so that we can de-escalate the situation. I recommend that we perhaps have an external review board for city government. I'm just talking about up in Lansing, an external review, not people working, you know, the police, it doesn't make any sense. You have an internal affairs board. There are other police investigating other police. In red lighting, develop a use of force continuum. That's something that I'll forward to the chief of police because it would take too much time to explain here. And another thing that I'd recommend, community policing is when the police officers get out of their vehicles and they talk with people in the neighborhood that they patrol. So that, and I'm not saying do it all the time, but just get to know the residents in the area that you control, that you patrol. All right, thanks for the opportunity to share those words with you.
Thank you, sir. What did you do for the Department of Corrections?
I was a assistant deputy warden for programs, and so we did parenting classes. We did taught them how to we do substance abuse courses. We would do we also done. I'll share this with you. This was powerful. We also did classes that were in cognitive reconstruction. And what that included was we would have them to talk about how their crime impacted their victim, whether it was carjacking, taking somebody's shoes, so they could reflect upon how would you feel if somebody stole your mother's purse? How would you feel if somebody carjacked you?
And,
So
and my point was you were deputy warden, so you knew how officers felt when they were accused of things that they may not have done. You've been on both sides of that.
Correct.
Okay. Well, good.
And
thank you.
you know,
I appreciate.
Let me share this with you. This is one of the great things. We instituted a policy where we put cameras in the units, and so that protected not only the officers but the prisoners also, and that cut down on accusations.
Right. So thank you. Wonderful. Yeah. Thank you. We're gonna hear from a faith community, Dr. Melvin Jones, who is the chair of the Greater Lansing Clergy Forum. He's going to share just for a few minutes. Dr. Jones, you out there?
I am. Good evening, everyone. I'm appreciative of the opportunity just to share for a moment or so. What I am advocating in the community, because of some of the experience that I've had working with the criminal justice system, is an independent review process for the police department. You know, I have had experience, and really one of the experiences, and I think Bishop Maxwell will perhaps talk about it later on, with Darrenisha Clay, the young woman that was shot down in a bank on MLK, and just trying to penetrate the system was very difficult, and the review process, as I understand it, is an internal review process by the police department. There is a state department that does the investigation, I think, on cases such as shootings, and there is also the county prosecutor who then what the legal penalty should be. But my experience is that the leaders in these various groups have relationships that form over time. And in many cases, what they do is to protect police, and the average citizen has a very difficult time penetrating that kind of system. So that's really what I'm putting on the table as hopefully a process that will give a representative body from the community in terms of police investigation, rather than to rely, as has already been stated, on police investigating police. Now, within the city, there is another investigator, but I'm not sure how effective that is, because I think that investigator reports to the police commission, and the police commission, in my opinion, is really embedded within the system. You know, I cannot remember, and I've done some investigating, I cannot remember when that commission has really brought an accusation against a policeman. Now, I could be wrong, and I'd stand to be corrected, but it seems to me to be more of a cheerleading organization for police activities rather than a real investigative body, and a body that really intersects and or even meets with the community. So that's where I am in terms of systemic change, and that is to at least have an independent community process for police investigation. Thank you.
Thank you, Reverend Dr. Jones. Did you place that in the question, in the idea in the chat?
Yes, I did.
Okay, good. So we'll address that here shortly. Just kind of representing the state. Is Representative Sarah Anthony out there? Is she here? State Rep Sarah Anthony, did she make it on? I know she had another engagement and she was going to work her way in. So I put her on hold if she's not out there. And I want to go to the, can you put the placard for the police chief, Lansing Police Chief Daryl Green? Chief Green.
Yeah, sorry about that. I'm a little slow with the button there. So.
Oh yeah, no problem. Yeah, go ahead. You're on.
Okay. So first off, thank you, Bishop and clergy, for bringing up me to this forum. Thank you, Dr. Kobina, for an excellent presentation. I definitely learned a lot out of that, and also the general generational perspectives I thought was very informative. And thank you very much for sharing your candidness. So to the chaplains, I have a couple chaplains that are here from the Lansing Police Department. Pickens, Milton, and former chaplain Frank Whaler is also here as well. So I want to just kind of maybe share some of my perspective as being a African-American police officer, now police chief, and just share that perspective a little bit. So, you know, one of the things I talk about when I first started here in the Lansing Police Department, and I grew up in a military household and primarily on the East Coast, and I graduated from Temple University in Philadelphia, and had professors like Sonia Sanchez, Malifi Asante from Afrocentricity, Bobby Seale, a former Black Panther. So I come from that revolutionary spirit that is, you know, I would think it's deadened throughout my policing career. And I'll tell all of my classmates when I go back to Temple University for homecomings from time to time that I've definitely changed. I think that change was a result of my career here in policing, just being saturated and also in a Midwest environment as well. But so from my perspective, when I first started here in 1997, my first day on the job, out of the police academy, I went to LCC's police academy. I came out here to grad school and joined the police academy. And while in the police academy, I had, you know, a variety of different experiences with racism, particularly for some other departments. People were really jealous because in the police academy, people were either sponsored, meaning that the police department they're going to work for is paying for their academy, or you either pay for your own academy. I was lucky that the Lansing Police Department paid for my academy, and myself and several others. There was an initiative to hire people of color, and several of us starting at the Lansing Community College experienced a variety of different belittling experiences that I would probably say were definitely racism and systemic in practices. And so I graduated from the police academy, started at LPD, and my first day on the job, I remember I couldn't even I didn't know how to put on my uniform, didn't have any type of mentorship. You were kind of like on your own, and you kind of saw that certain officers that didn't look or have the same hue as me were given those mentors and had those connections. And myself and my other colleagues that were people of color were kind of out on our own. And I remember the first day, the chief of police came down, and he was in the restroom, and that's where we changed to put our uniform on. And he helped me put my tie clip on and so forth. And I went back to the lockers the next day to change, and there was a row of stickers on the lockers that said, "You were visited by a member of the Ku Klux Klan." And so that was really my first experience at the Lansing Police Department. And I complained to one of the black sergeants about it, and they took him down immediately. But I never was given any information on, was anyone disciplined? Was there full investigation? But that really started my career with the Lansing Police Department. And in the field training officer program, you try to take the subjectivity out of training an officer, because essentially you're sitting next to a trainer and they're judging you and giving you more responsibility, and they're writing records on how you're doing or not doing as well. And so I saw many African Americans particularly that were hired during that time frame in 97, 98, 99, that came in the front door at the Lansing Police Department, but didn't make it out of the field training officer program successfully. So we lost a lot of good people. And during that time frame, myself and 6 other officers, we filed a complaint of bias behavior here at the Lansing Police Department. And I really credit Chief Mark Alley for really engaging that process, because first of all, he gave us a fair shake and opportunity to listen. He brought in some experts. He brought in Dr. Terry Curry from Michigan State University. He did a study on our disciplinary process. He did a study on the internal affairs complaint system. And he did find some bias, particularly for African-American members of the force regarding our disciplinary process. So it's always my argument that if you were disciplined during that time frame, it was bias. And so I come from that perspective, but at the same time, I'm very hopeful of our police department, because we were able to make that change. We now have a disciplinary matrix as far as, our disciplinary processes. And I saw the Lansing Police Department, and I'm not saying we don't have problems like any other police department in this area, but I think we have less problems than any other police department in this area. I would definitely state that. But I've seen the department evolve throughout the years, and I've heard people talk specifically about training in this conversation, and I don't view training as a catch-all. Training's not, and we have all the training, implicit bias, we have de-escalation, we have crisis intervention training, dealing with mental illness and de-escalating those experiences. I brought in Dr. Freya Rivers, who started Sankofa Shule for humane policing. We're doing all of those things, and our textbook and Bible is the Obama administration's 21st Century Policing Task Force. And we're on guidelines as far as meeting all those wickets on there. And someone also, I know the mayor is going to do the 8 Can't Wait campaign that has a different, and we've already done that stuff. And so when this incident happened in Minneapolis, I was completely frustrated, because here we are Not to say our department can't get better, because I believe we can, particularly for systemic racism, we can get better. But I was very upset at the fact that, you know, many in the community that we have built relationships. We have around 360 positive community interactions every year. We have the gang resistance education and training program that teaches peers 6th to 8th grade social development skills, how to avoid the pressures of gangs. We also were in the school district. We also have the police athletic league. So we're doing a lot of those wickets. And I was deeply offended that we lost a lot of supporters, a lot of people that really praised us for the efforts we did. And we are suffering, we are regressing when it comes to our community relationships as a result. And so my experience, you know, dictates that, you know, we will do our best. We will be tenacious at improving our relationship, rebuilding those bridges that I think we have suffered as a result of the horrific death of George Floyd. And I certainly stand up against police brutality. I've had multiple officers call me crying and saying, Green, you need to get out there and say more. You need to do more. This is not us. But right now, people are so outraged, so upset that they don't see us. They just see, you know, this universal branding of police. And, you know, you have multiple incidents that are showed over again. I'm just watching, you know, the Buffalo, what happened with the 70-plus-year-old man. Just horrible things in New York City. And, you know, I'm listening and hearing these things, and I know that's not our police department. We have made mistakes. We've had missteps, but we've worked diligently and hard. And everything that I'm being asked for to do right now, we've already done it. It's already embedded in our culture. And as I said, training is not a catch-all, be-all. I mean, you have to have I look at things holistically. From the police entity, you have to have not only the training, you have to have the oversight. You know, I heard what you said, you know, I'm sorry, who was that? Dr. Jones. I heard what you said about, you know, having some issues about police officers investigating themselves. And whenever there's a criminal investigation, we can't call another state or another city to investigate. We call the Michigan State Police. I mean, there's always going to be that tinge of, you know, just another cop. They're going to care and look out for their particular other officers. I tell people there are 18,000 different police departments, and almost all of them have different policies and procedures. You know, you talk about Minneapolis. We've had the duty to intervene if you see excessive force for years. The strangleholds, the chokeholds, that stuff's been going on for 20 years at our department. These are things that we've done, but we are suffering because of the actions of other police departments. And that's what is offensive to me, that, you know, the community, and I'm not upset at the community. I understand the outrage. I have African-American boys that are navigating not only Lansing, but across the country that are interacting with these some 18,000 different police agencies. Some are good. Some have some really strong protocols, policies, some really good training. Others don't. Others don't have the culture. We've been involved in community policing since the early 80s. And, you know, we're with one of the founders, Trojanowitz, and, you know, the Flint Foot Study. I mean, that's how long community policing has been embedded in our department. We're constantly trying to increase community policing. We know you got to get out of the car. We went from, we had 10 community police officers. We now have 12. You know, the mayor was able to put that in the budget for us. There's opportunities, but again, from my own experience, I was able to see Lansing Police Department evolve. It's certainly better than it was in 1997. We still have some gaps, some issues. We still can get better. You know, as far as the disciplinary process and who we contact, I think it's going to be a major fix to take that. There's going to be some money involved to form a paid civilian oversight committee, and, you know, where you have investigators, a system like you have down in Detroit. It's going to take some money. It's going to take some charter changes. It's going to take some contract negotiations with collective bargaining agreements. The problem is, well received. I'm willing to work with this commission, this community on facilitating that. I work for the community. I get that. I want to see this police department do some good things. I want to see us stand out for the efforts we've done. We were recognized by the Police Executive Research Forum for having one of the best recruiting programs in the country when it came to recruiting minority candidates. We're hitting some of those wickets. There's a lot more to do. I'm anxious to listen, and I'll conclude at this time and say thank you very much for inviting me.
Thank you, Chief. I appreciate that. I think your comments were well received. We know that you have to make a lot of decisions, and we know decisions are not made in a vacuum. And sometimes you have to make them on the go. And, me being a pastor and many of the pastors out there, we know that all too well because we have to make decisions all the time. And sometimes people don't understand why. And I appreciate you sharing the part about the training and all of those things. It begged a question to me, and I think I'm gonna wait until we ask questions, but I was just thinking, because you talked about the police training, all of the youth training and those type of things, and you're saying you do all that, you have all that. If training doesn't do it, then I guess, we have to ask the question, then what will take us to the next level in policing? So we can deal with that later, but I certainly appreciate you sharing. The mayor had to, is Mayor Shor there? Andy? Well, he had to speak. Yeah, go ahead.
I'm here, Bishop. I apologize to everybody. I'm watching City Council at the same time, and at some point they're going to ask me to speak under Mayor's comments, but it looks like I'm just waiting. So I'm happy to chat, but I may need to take a break in a few minutes to address Council. Okay.
Do you want to share what you have to say now, or you want to wait?
Sure, and I'm going to be very, very brief. So thank you, Bishop Singleton. You have taken the lead and really are a wonderful leader with this commission, with the Interfaith Council. So I do thank you, and thanks for all the members that are serving. This has been a very tough week for me, as many of you know, and as many of you have reached out, and I thank you for that. When you all tell me you're praying for me, it really does make a lot of difference. I was horrified with the death of George Floyd. It really struck me hard. And then I made some missteps on a call this week with Black Lives Matter, where I really wasn't able to appropriately listen or appropriately reflect on my thoughts for Lansing. But we're moving forward. One of the things I heard things all weekend, and I've heard a lot of feedback, and this has been tremendously helpful. So thank you to Dr. Kobina and to all the folks who spoke, from our youth to our elders. I mean, really very powerful. We're working on bringing the voices together. One of the things I heard even yesterday outside my house, 2 days ago outside my house, was that people want to see resources. They want to see mental health funding. They want to see everything that the doctor talked about in terms of putting those dollars in, and I'm extremely supportive of that. I mean, I think the doctor's presentation made the argument very well, and we were proud to create a police social worker a year or two ago, and it's been a big difference. I've heard from a lot of people. We're not putting mentally ill in jail; we're helping them. But I want to continue to listen. We announced about an hour ago we're gonna, with the current budget, which ends in about 30 days, we're gonna take about $170,000 and put it into a racial equity and anti-discrimination fund, where we can give that to the groups who are doing the work. I'm not trying to create new processes. I want to give that to the folks who are already doing the work. So we are going to create that with existing dollars. It's not everything I want to give, and it's not as much as that probably is needed, but that's what we have available in our current budget, which ends again in 30 days, and most of it's spent. And we're going to be bringing together a variety of people to leaders, our Diversity and Inclusion Commission, and others to help put together an action plan. So I've taken all the comments you all are throwing out there. I might have to cheat and grab some of those slides, but we want to put together an action plan and start pushing forward with some real change, not just a plan on the shelf, not just random comments, but a real plan. And I'm going to need everybody's help on that. So I appreciate you all having me on. If you've been insulted by anything I said, I greatly apologize. I am learning as I go. I am not a perfect man. I have not walked in many of your shoes, and the things I learned, even from my police chief today, they help me to be a better mayor. And I appreciate you inviting me here. I'm happy to continue conversation, answer questions again in a minute. I'm going to have to pause and go to City Council, but I'm with you as long as you need.
Okay, thank you, Mayor. Certainly, you'll hear back from us. I'm interested to hear a little more about that budget you're allocating. That's a positive thing. Of course, I know I've heard about that Zoom event that was live that you were on that you're talking about, but we just want to mention that no one person speaks for all of us. We all have our own brains and our own minds, and we make decisions for ourselves. So you have listening ears here, and we appreciate you being here and sharing. If there are any we're going to go to, we're getting ready to try to close out this forum, but I want to put up the next slide here. And this slide is to educate ourselves on what's really been suggested. And certainly I want to encourage those of you that are on the call, if you have any questions or anything, to put it in the chat. You know, sometimes there's things that other entities or other groups are working on that we can partner with rather than recreate the wheel. And if there's anybody out there that have something, any grassroots things that they're working on, initiatives that can impact positive change, that we can rally around, and maybe it can become one of our targets that we can rally around and help push. Is there anyone out there that have anything that's working with a group that have something that you think maybe policy suggestion or anything, so we can capture it? And the only thing I want to do, and the only thing I'm asking you to do, is just share what it is so we can capture it in our notes, so that we can sit down with the mayor and the chief and go from there. Anyone? Just unmute yourself.
Alex Pickens. Bishop,
Alex
can you hear
Pickens.
me? Yes.
Yeah, yes, sir. Good to see you.
Good to see you too, Bishop. Briefly, with regard to the question, the thing that we're doing right now is leaning into our pain. I could share, as so many can share. As an African-American male, I was terrorized by police as a teenager, lived with it all through my adult years. I came to a come to Jesus moment in the prayer closet, and the Lord said, either you can fear the cops or you can fear me. I said, I fear you above all, Lord. You're my light and my salvation. And the Lord sent me to the police station in fear and trembling, knocking on the door, saying, I don't know what I'm doing here other than the Lord sent me, and I can't live like this anymore. They signed me up for a ride along. I did that ride along in 2012, and it changed my life. And so I moved from fearing the police, suspecting the police, being paranoid of the police, to leaning into engagement with the police in Jesus' name. And for whatever reason, they picked me up as a chaplain. So one of the programs that's going out right now is walking alongside cops who have not put a knee in the neck, who have not, tarnished a 10-year, 15-year career. As far as I know, they're still on the road doing a good job, and they need Jesus. on both sides of that thin blue line. So that's one of the things that's out there. It's a chaplaincy. It's not for everybody. I've lost some friends, and I'm okay with that. My hope is that the friend who sticks closer than a little brother one day will say, well done.
Thank you for that. So the name of the group you were talking about again?
Yep, what I'll do is I'll put the link in the chat to your communications director, and they'll push that out.
And your suggestion was to walk alongside the cops. Is that what you're saying?
Correct. So the suggestion, thank you for the clarification. Right now, we have a new initiative we brought on with Texas. An organization in Texas is called Adopt a Cop, and it's a prayer ministry that partners one prayer partner with one cop in one department. Lansing just approved it earlier in 2020. And so Adopt a Cop allows you to be connected to a cop by badge number. Pray for that cop 2 or 3 times a year. It's in anonymity. Cop doesn't know who the prayer partner is. Prayer partner doesn't know who the cop is, but they're writing to one another. And in anonymity, when they're ready, they can reveal their identities and develop a deeper relationship if they want to. If they don't, they remain anonymous. But it's prayer, written notes, Christmas cards, birthdays, that kind of thing.
Wow.
And we're offering.
Yeah, put that in the chat, and we capture that in our notes, and we're going to keep that in front of us. We do have a couple of questions that came in the chat, and the first one is from
Frank Weller.
Frank Weller. And what's the question? He's grabbing it now.
Okay. He said, fantastic presentation by Dr. Colbina. He is curious to know, of the 3 types of protesters she identified, is there some idea of the percentage of protesters in the 3 categories? And second part to the question is, does she have any sense of whether or not the protests in Lansing are similarly made up?
Did you all hear that? You heard it?
I heard the question. I will say in Ferguson, and thank you for that question. In Ferguson, so this was not a representative sample. In Ferguson, the vast majority of people I spoke to were revolutionary protesters. This was for a few reasons. I received my doctorate at the University of Missouri St. Louis, so I had a lot of contacts. I literally lived 2 minutes away from Ferguson when I was a student. Flyers were placed on social media, and I was also told too, during a protest, people printed out my flyer and it was handed out amongst protesters. The reality is my phone couldn't stop ringing, and it was largely from revolutionary protesters. So in my study, the vast majority, I don't have the percentage, I'd have to look in my book, but in Ferguson, the majority of people I spoke to were revolutionary protesters, with probably about, I don't want to say a percentage, I was going to say maybe about 2/3, but I don't want to be proven wrong if I open my book. There was, in Baltimore, I interviewed more intermittent and tourist protesters, but it's interesting. And so, because the question is asked, is similar, is what's happening in Lansing similar to what I'm seeing now? What I've also noticed is, I mean, this is fluid. You can go from being an intermittent tourist protester to when people see so much wrong happening, then they become outraged, and now they become revolutionary protesters, right? Protesting on the front lines all the time, being outraged by what they're seeing. And it drives even more people to the streets. Initially, it may be like, hey, I just want to check it out. You know, CNN's out there. I want to see what's going on. But then when you go and you see other people, men, women, boys, and girls being tear gassed while peacefully protesting, the egregious acts or the militarized tactics by police, it outrages people. And now a person who would have been, when who started off as a tourist or an intermittent protester, has now become a revolutionary protester. And I think sometimes I'm seeing that with young people, so outraged by what they're seeing, what they're witnessing, and even what they're experiencing. I mentioned to some, I think I was mentioning to one reporter, you know, the protesters are protesting police violence. When the state comes back and utilizes extreme violence for the very thing people are protesting, it will not quell that. It will only, it creates an internal solidarity. It reinforces why we're out here. It will not stop it, and there will continue to be disruption and more organizing and strategizing to defeat, do whatever they can to stop state violence. I talked to many who are willing to put their lives on the line to end systemic racism. So it will not stop.
All right, thank you. Did that answer your question?
It did, thank you.
Okay, we have another question and comment in the chat.
From Stanley Jenkins.
From Stanley Jenkins, Pastor Stanley Jenkins.
It says, what are the obstacles to creating an external review commission?
What are the obstacles to creating an external review commission? I assume that's directed at Chief Green. Who is that directed at?
I could try to answer that. I think that's more of a question for a city attorney. You have some charter issues, the charter. You also have, it's going to require funding. If you want to have an truly independent oversight review, you're going to have your own investigators. You're going to have full-time people that investigate that. So those are two of the hurdles that you have to jump over. And then the collective bargaining agreements for police, non-supervisory and supervisory, you're also going to have to make some amendments to those agreements as well. Those are some of the hurdles. It's possible, but you know, it's definitely, the money is probably going to be the biggest hurdle.
Okay, and while you're out there, I think we have some more check. Did he answer the question for you? Okay. While you're out there, Chief, just use of force policies. Now, did you say you all have those? I'm quite sure you do, but I'm just clarifying.
Yes, sir. We have a use of force policy. Some of the things that are high points reference Minneapolis, placing your knee on someone's neck. We are not trained in that type of technique at all. We view it as excessive force. The officers would have to intervene immediately, and they would also have to report that excessive force to a supervisor.
Okay, thank you. What other questions do we have?
Pastor Embry just also wanted to add to the previous question. He would like to see an external review board for the city government.
Bishop Embry is asking for an external review board to the city government.
Okay.
Do we have one of those at all? Have we ever had one?
I can't answer that. Are we talking specifically policing, or are we?
Yeah, I think that's what he's. What do you talk, Embry? Are you out there?
I go.
He's gone. I don't know, but anyhow,
he's muted. He's muted.
Okay, so I believe he's talking about in policing, Chief.
All right. So, kind of the system we have now that I heard Dr. Jones' argument that he didn't believe that it was an independent system. We have a commissioned investigator. That position falls under the tutelage of the supervisory of the Board of Police Commissioners, and works directly under the Human Relations, department as well, and also via the HR department as well. So that commission investigator, from my perspective, now again, that's supposed to be an independent body that Lansing Police Chief Darrell Crean has nothing to do with. So I don't know all of his responsibilities. I do know that people have the ability from the community to contact that commissioning investigator if they do not want to file a complaint internally at the Lansing Police Department. I've given that commission investigator access to all of our databases our internal affairs databases, all of our databases as far as record management system. He has all of our policies and procedures. So he can conduct his own independent investigation. He reports that to the Board of Police Commissioners, and they make recommendations also to the police chief. And so their recommendations come to me. I look at our disciplinary matrix if an officer has a sustained complaint, and I will forward that recommendation back to them, and we can debate it, we can argue it, but ultimately, contractually, with both unions, the police chief institutes the discipline.
Okay. Dr. Jones, you still out there? Okay, don't sound like it. Well, Catherine, we're recording this, Chief. So if there's anything additional we need to deal with on that, we will. Do we have anything else? Any other questions in the chat?
Several other questions.
Just several other. And I'm trying to move this along. We're at the end next. I just want to pull a couple of items out of this and make sure we have something to do a next step with. Okay.
This individual doesn't have a name for their profile, but they said they believe Chief Green and his newly inherited police department is moving forward. Moving upward. However, the force is made up of about 300 officers, and how many of them are people of color? Your qualifications, I believe, is at a doctorate level. However, you were overlooked before the last police chief. The mayor inherited a cabinet with about 7 to 9 people of color. That number has been reduced to about 3. How can we make real systemic change if we don't even have proper representation of our community? Real change is seeing a mayor and a police force that looks like the community.
Okay, well, Chief Green, it looks like you might as get, I hope you're in your best seat right now, because you're getting a lot of questions now. Yeah.
Go ahead.
Bishop Singleton, go ahead.
Yeah, even though that he gave reference to the police department, I think that question is more appropriate for the mayor, because it actually asked regarding the mayor's cabinet.
And I'm actually back on. I can address that if you'd like.
Okay. Yeah. Well, I think this is a good time. I'm going to try to end this at 8:30 or before, if you all don't mind. But I think we need to try to capture this stuff.
Yeah. Well, I put the answer in the chat because again, I'm waiting on City Council. I think I'm next at City Council. But I'm very proud of my cabinet. I agree with whoever iPhone 2 is that our leadership should match our city. I put the list in there. We have 7 members of our cabinet of our people of color, and they're all fantastic. I mean, Chief Green is a wonderful police chief. He's doing a fantastic job. Kim Coleman is our HRCS director. She's doing a great job. She, I believe, is on the call. Judy Keeler is our treasurer and income tax, or our tax revenue officer. I think they're all doing a fantastic job. Bishop Maxwell continues to be a force in our cabinet. I didn't even list Marilyn Plummer, who is wonderful, but she's going to be retiring in about a month, which is devastating to me, because she's been with me since I first came into the House of Representatives. Linda Sanchez Gazella is terrific. So I agree with the person who wrote that our leadership, our cabinet, should reflect our community, and I think that that the people that we have in leadership in my cabinet, they do that.
Okay.
Excuse me, Bishop, could I just one alibi to the mayor? So first off, I just want to let everyone know that the previous police chief was hired by the former mayor, and it was not the selection of Mayor Shor. And our police department is about 24% people of color, and I think that number is about 13% for African Americans, and we're right around 46% between men and women as well.
Okay, thank you for that. We do have 4 questions in the queue. I'm going to try to get through them real quickly so we can move to our next slide, which is next steps and just accountability action items. And I want you all to think about what is it we should take away from this. You know, if we can have 1 or 2 suggestions, 1 to 3 or whatever. And so think about that just for a minute. What's the next question?
The next question is from Carol. She said, I am speaking with Attorney General Dana Nessel tomorrow about use of force reviews that are centralized outside of the local level by either local police or prosecutor, which I believe is the road to head toward.
Okay.
And I don't know if she has
What's
a
her question?
Or,
just making a comment?
She's responding to the last.
Okay, all right.
About what's being done.
Okay, so she's going to do that. I would like to hear from her after she gets done. What's the next question? Thank you for that comment.
Okay. The next question is from, I believe, Michael Zimmerman.
Rabbi Zimmerman, yes.
Yes, Rabbi Zimmerman. How does one explain that in Dr. Kobina's study, community members found Black officers just as aggressive as non-Black officers? Apparently just changing the racial composition of the police force is not enough.
Dr. Kobina?
Yeah, that's exactly what I argue. It's not enough. I mean, I will say, you know, 25% of my sample, they believe that Black officers are courteous and respectful compared to white officers. That 25% came largely from members those who resided in Ferguson. If you recall, when Michael Brown died, over 90%, about 95% of the police force was white. So Ferguson residents perceived Black officers would be better, but they didn't have direct interactions with Black officers. Baltimore, another 25% stated that Black officers are just as aggressive. And they spoke from actually having these direct encounters with the police. And so what I argue or conclude in my book is that simply hiring Black officers in these positions is not enough. I also would like to remind everyone too that the Department of Justice conducted their own independent investigation of the Baltimore Police Department at the time that Freddie Gray died. If you'll recall, so nearly half of the police force at the time in Baltimore was Black, including the police chief, and even there were 6 officers involved in Freddie Gray's death, half of which were Black, and yet we still saw what happened with Freddie Gray. And the Department of Justice, after conducting their own independent investigation, they concluded that the Baltimore Police Department engaged in a pattern of unconstitutional, racially biased policing. And so what I argue is that we are talking about a system here, and unless the culture of policing changes, that again, adding officers of color is not going to help, particularly if they are trained, or if there's a culture of aggressively policing Black and brown communities.
All right, thank you. What's our next question?
These couple things are not questions. These are just to let everybody know that Pastor, Alex Pickens and Pastor Sean Holland and Cameo King have all posted links inside of the group chat so everybody could look at those. These are things that will help you inform yourself or give yourself some more knowledge about current issues. We have another question from Bishop Mona. I believe that's Reed. This is addressed to Mayor Shor. You mentioned funding from the current budget for diversity and inclusion. What initiatives do you see moving forward into the new fiscal year to change systemic racism?
Thank you for the question. The funding that I mentioned actually is going to go into a fund that we've identified specifically towards racial equity and anti-discrimination. And the plan is to give those dollars to groups that are already doing this without having to start something new. So in essence, augmenting resources out there. And right now I'm taking a lot of input. Again, we're taking a lot of input from people, which is why, I want to hear from you. This is what I'm hearing right now. What would you do differently? What do you want to see differently? So that we can work through an action plan that is put together by leaders in the community that we can use to move forward. And then again, there's a lot of pieces to this. You know, we are going to take I am going to take the 8 Can't Wait pledge, which is important. I am going to take the Obama mayor's pledge, which is important, to make sure that, you know, we're reviewing our use of force policy, to make sure that the trainings that we've talked about are in place, and all of these things to show the community. We want to be transparent. So I want to provide crime data. I want to provide all of these things that the community really expects. It's all out there. It's just really hard to find right now. So we're going to centralize all of that. But again, there's a lot more pieces to this. You know, I've been very involved with reforms for crimes being wiped off the books. I'm losing the word. Someone will come up with it. But we've been very involved with that, dealing with fines. When you deal with unnecessary fines that then get worse and worse, that is usually an equity issue, because people of lower incomes cannot afford it, and that affects communities of color more than others. So that is an equity issue, and we are working through that now. And again, that's going to be another big piece. So there's a lot. There's a lot of things that I want to collect and put out there, but I don't want it to just be everything that I want to do. I want to continue to take expungement. Thank you, Bishop. Bishop sent me the word. I want to do the things that people are talking about. You know, I'm open to all of these things that have been talked about today. I'm open to looking at the police board of commissioners and creating an oversight board. I'm not going to close my mind to these things. I'm going to be open to them, and we can put together an action plan. I'm never going to commit to solving discrimination and racism, but we're gonna do better here in Lansing, and it's a priority.
Thank you, Mayor. There's a scripture in the Bible that talks about wherever you put your treasures, that's where your heart is. So whenever we can put money towards things that's going to make a difference, that tells us that it's important. So thank you for that. Quite sure it's going to take a lot more money than that, but that's a start. We appreciate that. What's the next question?
This is from Bishop Duncan.
Bishop Duncan, question. Go ahead.
With reform and change in laws and training, all which are great and much needed, and would be welcomed as a first step. However, none of those things changes a man's heart. Changed laws and procedures don't equate to changed hearts. How do we address and correct this problem?
That sounds like that should go to the faith-based community. When you start talking about changing hearts. Well, I know that you can walk into, one time my late father was walking out of a store. And that was when we were living in Los Angeles, California. And my brother and I were just young boys, and we were in the car. And my father he used to spit on the ground. And while he was walking out the store, he spit on the ground, and he noticed a man that was, he was walking in the store, and another gentleman was walking out. He spit on the ground, and he noticed that the man looked like he took offense to it because it came near him. So my father went in the store, and the man came out, but when he was coming out of the store, the man was walking towards him. And my father looked at the man and said, "Did I spit on you?" He said, "If I did, I'm sorry." I think what changed hearts is just simply being humble, admitting truth, and saying, "I'm sorry." I think hearts can be changed if we be real with each other. It's not about whether we did something offensive or wrong, but are we willing to admit it? I feel that where we start is when we talk to the mayor's office, and the mayor shares something, and he follows up and does what he said he's going to do. It'll change our perspective towards the mayor. Same thing with the police, same thing with the prosecuting attorney, same thing with a corporation, a church, our neighborhood. If we start being real with each other and back up what we say with honesty, I think we can change hearts one at a time. Bishop Duncan, that's a powerful and loaded question. And it's true that hearts need to be changed. That's the only way we're going to make this a better environment.
Can I add something very quick to that?
Yes, go ahead, sir.
I think probably the key of what we can do as religious leaders, in particular white pastors, is that we need to engage in our congregations in self-reflection and education. If anything's going to change in the culture, it's going to be coming from the white people. That's where we need to change. We need to call out racism, systematic, and every form as sin. Use our biblical language. And I think it's a long process, but we're called to repentance, which in the Greek means metanoia, change of minds. We can do that as people of faith. We have resources and people give us the authority to do that. Thank you.
Thank you. Great point. It might be a good idea to start a initiative. I don't know what you would call it, but it'd probably be a great idea to start an initiative like that, because I think that's part of the problem. Thank you.
Invite you all to the First Presbyterian Church of Lansing.
I did capture that because I think that's a good point. That's a good point. I think that's where it's really going to start. You know, if you're African American and you talk about reparations, even though I'm not trying to bring that issue up to talk about it, but if you talk about other issues and it seems like nobody cares, that speaks to the heart, and it's hard for the heart to heal when they feel like no one's listening. Like Martin Luther King said, the language of those that are not being heard is riot. And so the hearts have to be changed. What's the next question?
Can I comment there?
Yeah, go ahead. Who is that? Oh, I see.
My name is Cece. And I'm actually, I think my question's next, and really it kind of goes into this, and it's what is the Interfaith Council doing to bring about systematic change? And as I heard you speak, Bishop, and then the pastor of the Presbyterian Church, I think one of the things, and this is just a suggestion, I'm a director of an upcoming community center, but partly I want to speak as a Christian, and partly I want to speak as a community member. But as I'm hearing and listening and hearing you specifically speak on just being humble and being in the first place, but what would it look like if all of the pastors, I mean, we are the capital city in Michigan. I mean, if change is going to start, hearts are going to change. Why not start here in Lansing, in the capital city? What would it look like? Because this should be led, we should be leading our nation as Christians with the answer, because we have answers, but we have to have actions as well as answers. What would it look like on the capital city lawn if every pastor, regardless of race or religion, were to stand on the capital city along with all police officers, with department heads, the city council, our mayor, everyone that wants change, to step in and speak to specifically African Americans, starting with that, with I'm sorry, forgive us, even as Christians, for we have not listened, taken time to have the conversations. Every church across America right now is having a preaching on racial injustice because it's all over the news. Before all of this, and a lot of churches I've seen have probably maybe once a year they bring it about, but it's not something that's consistent. And what's going to bring change is something consistent. What would it look like if it started with us as Christians, as leading this city, and starting the real conversation with, I'm sorry, will you forgive us? And let's start change. And then we bring about how we're going to change. Give the platform to the chief and say, listen, this is what we've been doing, but this is what we're going to do. You know, because people want to hear and they want to see that we're bringing about change, and that they're heard and that they're validated. And I think more than ever, Black Americans need to be told they have the right to be upset, the right to be angry. But what would it look like if us as Christians were to step in and say, hey, we want to listen to you. We want to say that we're sorry. And as churches, what if we came up together and started raising funds for our own community? Let's add to that 150,000. I mean, the reality is cities, we don't have money, and I'm not for them taking it from the police. We need police. There's a lot of different things, but what if we were to join all together in all of our efforts to figure out how do we change our city one day at a time?
Am I muted?
Nope.
Great question. And certainly we captured that in. I'm quite sure everybody's pondering that and thinking about that. And we're going to certainly keep that in front of us. I like the idea of standing with police officers, standing with business people, standing with CEOs, standing with protesters, standing with everyone, and just being real and open our hearts. Because truly that's when change starts, when hearts change. Yeah.
Can I add? I really appreciate that, Cece. Something similar has been happening. It's called the Police Community Reconciliation Framework. And it started in John Jay. And so essentially that's what they're doing, something similar, except they've just included law enforcement, from police chief to rank and file officers, coming and just first acknowledging to the community, we wronged you. These are the ways that traditional policing has harmed communities. This is the way that we have actually encouraged, enabled, and participated, right, in systemic racism. There is an actual direct, like, I'm sorry, and these are the ways we actually harm the community. Even acknowledging too, because sometimes you hear officers like, well, I wasn't around during that time. I didn't myself do it, but understanding the history of the badge and what that means, particularly for African-American people. And so that is actually the first step, because we always talk about reconciliation, but in order for reconciliation to happen, there first has to be an acknowledgement of the harm that has been done by law enforcement. And I love the fact that CC is also now suggesting bringing pastors along board as well, because that's just the first step, because then there's an opportunity to bring community members and police officers where they're kind of like what we're doing now, but where they're expressing the ways in which they feel, the experiences that they've had, and how that has shaped their perceptions. First hearing from community members, but then also hearing from law enforcement officials as well. And then what what they're doing with this police community reconciliation framework is they're also actually recording so that no one can dismiss how the harms that have actually been caused. And that's disseminated to police and to the community. And then finally together, police and community, kind of like what we're trying to do now, coming up with concrete practices and solutions to bring about real change. So I really like what CC suggested. There's something like that happening with the police community reconciliation framework, but what they've not included, which I think is a really important point, is also bringing pastors on board. Because, you know, what many of us who are faith-based know, the issue is a sin issue. And if we're going to change hearts, we know pastors and faith-based communities have to come on board.
And I want to add something too, just really briefly. I know we're talking on the systemic level, and I just love everything that has been shared, you know, from different organizations and the representation of the faith community and the representation of law enforcement and other large organizations. But I think the question or this conversation initially started with hearts. And so how can we deal with this on an interpersonal level? You know, you can have large organizations apologize, but how does the heart really begin to change? And just as a suggestion, and this may seem kind of radical, but you have to create a space. And since we're talking about racism, you have to create a space for racists in our faith communities to admit that they are racist, and then have some type of program or some type of process that you're taking them to, so they won't be, again, radical, you know. You know, so because if you admit you're racist, you're going to lose your job, because we understand the ramifications of being racist in society, because you sincerely harm people. You kill people emotionally, psychologically, economically. But if we're sincerely talking about doing the work, I think that's potentially what it looks like, and that is on the hands of, I believe, our white brothers and white sisters who potentially too have been there, who used to be racist, and God came into your life and showed you your heart. So this is a part of the work I do with the podcast. We have people come on and share their confessions. It's about like, this is who I used to be, and sometimes it's not pretty. And so I think that could be a part of the work, the interpersonal work, but that's definitely not in the hands of Black folks. That's not our work to do.
Okay. Well, thank you for that. How many, because it's getting close to the time to quit, and I want to do the closing prayer, but I do want to capture all of these things so that we can keep them in front of the Interfaith Advisory Council, as well as the Greater Lansing Clergy Forum and the other groups. And so we can come back together and kind of talk and figure out, where do we go from here? Because I like what you said, instead of just talk, what are we going to do? And I think there's a lot of things to do. So I see a lot of comments coming into the chat, and we're recording this. We're going to keep these. We're going to bring them back. We're not going to be able to solve anything here today, but we just wanted to come together in this forum and listen to each other. And so we can think about some ways to improve relationships in this community, and maybe be a beacon of light, so that we can impact the other cities, the other states, etc. And I think we can do that if we're serious about it. So are they going to be able to just share stuff in the chat, even if we don't talk about it right now?
So Rabbi Zimmerman just reminded me, Zoom will provide a text file with all of the chat entries. So not only will we have the ability to review this Zoom conference call as well, we should be able to share in some way, shape, or form the text.
Okay, wonderful. So what we're going to do is just keep putting your comments and your questions in the chat, and we are going to process them, and we are going to look at them, and we're going to get back together. So when you hear about it, you know what we're doing. One of the things we wanted to do this year through the Interfaith Advisory Council is to put on a panel discussion and have a couple of panels and invite the community in and broaden it, you know what I mean, and really talk about some of the serious issues, and make sure people understand they're being heard, right? And that there's buy-in to the things that they're hearing, and that we are going to make a difference. So hopefully you all would take this ride with us. My philosophy is, we have all kind of groups working on good things, coming up with strategies and ideas, but I think if we can work together on some level to push in one direction for the betterment of this community, that'll be great. So I'm not going to entertain any more questions at this time. I'm going to ask Fred McClone, if he's ready, he can, Pastor Fred McClone, he can close us out in prayer, but I want to make sure, go to the next slide. Let me see if I'm covering everything. Okay, we talked about getting plugged in, what should change look like, and we've been talking about some of that. We're going to go deeper into next steps and accountability, and we're going to dig out of some of these comments and some of the things that's in here, so we can come down with some action items. I just want to thank you for your participation, your perspectives, and your commitment to work together and to mobilize and make real change happen in the Lansing community. I hope this was value added for you. I hope it wasn't a waste of your time, and we hope you feel empowered by it. And so we're going to continue this. We're going to continue to have these discussions, and we're not so much concerned about everybody being on the same page and their thought processes and their views. No one's ever going to be on the same page, but what we can do is find something we can rally around and work together to try to make a better community, better city, and better world. So thank you all, and we're going to end this with prayer.
Heavenly Father, we are humbled
Thank you.
by what you've set before us. And we acknowledge that we have missed the mark for centuries. And Lord, you're giving us an opportunity to turn and return to what you have had in mind from before the foundations of the earth, for not just our community here in Lansing, but for the whole world. We acknowledge, Father, that we need you to lead us into and to empower us to have relationships of substance. How do we be reconciled with someone we've never had a relationship with in the first place? And so, Father, we ask for relationships of substance at every level and in every context. How can we rebuild something that in so many ways has never existed? Father, help us to level the ground and prepare the site and build what's in your heart to see built in our community and beyond. Father, give us eyes to see and ears to hear and hearts to understand. Father, you say in your word that he who gives an answer before he hears, to him it is folly and shame. Would you teach us to be listeners, Lord, like we've never been before? Would you set us free from that thing in us that can't wait to say what we think needs to be said while supposedly we're listening to one another? And Father, we're just asking for a few things that can be done and sustained, not just a whole lot of good ideas and a whole lot of talk. Father, I think back almost 40 years in this city at different efforts, at different pastors' groupings, at prayer efforts, Lord, and we need you to sustain those efforts. And would you call to memory those things that have happened in the past, even recommendations that have been made in many contexts that were simply shelved when a new administration came in, and yet, Lord, had value. Let us not despise the day of small beginnings, but take first steps, and we'll give you all the glory. And Father, I ask a special blessing on each one who attended this forum tonight, Lord, that their investment of this piece of their life, this time, would return great dividends to them and through them. And we'll give you all the glory in Jesus' name. Amen.
Amen. Thank you all for participating. I know it's been quite a long time we've been on this call, but we appreciate all of you. We hope it was value added, and you'll hear from us again. I had one more thing I was going to say, but that prayer made me forget it. So it works. That prayer works. It took it right out of my brain. So thank you all. And I just want to throw this out. Just kind of be on standby when we get ready to do a panel discussion. We're going to send information out. And thank you. We had as many as 70 plus participants in this Zoom call, and we weren't on social media, just invites to the call. So thank you all the pastors, all the leaders that join in, and those of you that are interested enough to try to help this community be stronger. Have a good night, and we'll see you later. Thank you, Mayor. Thank you, Chief. And thank you, the rest of you. Reverend Jones, Dr. Jones, God bless you.
Blessings.
Thank you.